Hello, everyone, and welcome to Less is More, designing lean React component interfaces for maximum impact. Whoa, that's a mouthful. Okay, yeah, really long. Either way, yeah, this is me, Daniel Espino Garcia. Yes, I need a haircut. I'm a senior software design engineer at Mattermost. And well, if you want to contact me, you can join the community server, and I will be there. That's kind of my office. Well, before we start, I want to tell you a bit of what we do at Mattermost. We are just a collaboration tool. Most people will say it's just an open source alternative to Slack and Microsoft Teams. The reality is that we do we have more stuff, especially designed for example, incident management, security, and all that stuff. So it is not just for the water cooler. You can use this also for the war room, let's say, more secure things, more critical things. But well, this is not what is important for this talk. The important part for this talk is that both our mobile and web app are written in React. Well, the mobile one is in React Native. And we've been around being open source for more than 10 years. And this is something that allows us to see a lot of different code. Let's call it that. With community members coming in and adding code, with different levels of employees also adding code to the app, we have seen many things. So why I am doing this talk? Let's see, for example, this. We have a component which it's props, it has error and error message, which sounds fine, right? No, this is not fine. Like, what does it mean to have an error message and has error being false? That's supposed to be an impossible state. Why do you have that impossible state there? Then this other thing, you have a component with 1, 2, 3, 4, 100 props. That's also not right. Sometimes it happens, but it usually smells a bit. Some other times you have this thing that you can set the size of the button with deciding if it's a small or a big button, but then you also can pass the style and say it's a small button of 300 pixels. That also doesn't make any sense. And then this thing over here where we have these magic strings and magic numbers. Like, what does it mean? I mean, OK, when you read it, makes sense. You say, yeah, it's an error, and it's 100 pixels, I guess, font size. But at the same time, it's like when you are using this component, you're like, OK, which was the type? It was error, errors, use E. And what was the size I needed? It was 100. What are the size that we are using? 100 was big, was medium. So all these things could be, I'm not going to say solved, but at least addressed with something I call MVI, which stands for the minimum viable interface. So what is MVI? It's a philosophy about how to write code. Important thing, it's a philosophy. It's not a dogma. So what I'm going to tell you is something you have to consider and decide on which situations it makes sense for you and which not. But yeah, it's kind of a philosophy about how to do things. And it's especially designed for something I call the business code to make a difference with the library code. And this will be the definition of MVI. Keep the interface of your entities as small as possible, with as little options as possible, only exposing the minimum needed to satisfy the business needs. So why will we do that? Why will we do that? First of all is cognitive load and readability. If we reduce the interface as much as possible, we probably are going to talk in higher level language. A language that hopefully even our friends in design or our friends in sales could understand. A language that tell us what the component actually do, and not the implementation details. Another thing that is important is, I don't know how many of you have heard of this magic number that is 7 plus minus 2. Have you ever heard that? No? Okay, in psychology, this is a magic number because after many studies, they discovered that our working memory, it can contain 7 plus minus 2 elements. Like depending on how smart you are and so on, the smartest people usually can handle 9 numbers, 9 digits, let's say 9 elements. And less smart people only get to 5, but it's always in that range. So if you have less props, when you are using a component, you are able to handle that information way better and understand that prop way better. And the same with less options. Like if you have to decide from an infinite amount of options, like for example, a number prop, it's really hard to decide which one is the right one. You will have to go to other parts of the code or remember what it was, what did it mean a medium button, for example. If you have less options, everything is way easier. And so around testing, the less props we have, the less combinations we have to test. So the less tests we have to build. So everyone is happy because nobody likes to write tests. But yeah, and also the behavior of how the component, the behavior of the component is more clearly defined because since we are using less props, the props are higher level language, and how the components should behave is more clearly defined. And since we have that, we have less undocumented behavior. We can test all the cases, and we can use tests as documentation. Next thing, easier refactoring. When you have minimum interfaces, you are not exposing implementation details. Not exposing implementation details allows you to refactor better. And also one thing that MBI tries is to wrap libraries. So also for switching libraries is great because the moment you have the libraries wrapped, you don't have to, again, care so much about the implementation. You can switch the library for a different one without changing so much your code. And finally, coherence. Why is coherence important? Because with MBI, you will be able to not having two ways of doing the same thing, because if you have two ways of doing the same thing, you have one extra prop that you can remove. And this is great for AI. AI is coming here to stay, and doesn't matter if we like it or not. And if you only give AI one option, it cannot hallucinate others. You just use the one that you want it to use. So yeah, that's the benefits. That's why we will do all the crazy things I'm going to tell you to do. But yeah, so let's go with a couple of concepts. First of all, what is an interface? What is the I part of the minimum viable interface? Well, if you look into the dictionary, it says that an interface is something that makes it possible for separate elements to work together or communicate. What does that mean? Well, there's many kinds of interfaces out there. I mean, for example, if you are looking in a library context, the interface will be all the exported methods. If you are looking into a function context, will be the arguments and the results. An object will be all the public methods and attributes. A website will be all the visible and interactable elements. If you go into a computer, will be the mouse, keyboard, screens. If you go to a grocery store, it also has an interface. Will be the cashier, the aisles, the trolleys. Everything can be an interface. So what is an interface in our context, in React components? Our props. And what we are going to try with MVI is reduce the props and the options inside the props to be as minimum as possible. For example, I don't know if this is the latest version, but this is a real example of how our tags work in Mattermost. We have some types, and those are the types. You cannot use a arbitrary string for the type. You have to use one of those. Similar for the size, it's not an arbitrary number, it's one of those. And a few things that are there. Actually, I would love to change how icon is given, because icon actually is from our, it should be a string that match one of the icons we have in our compass icon thing. But I haven't found how to properly type that. But yeah, that's the thing. Try to get as small, as little options as possible. But also, there's the hidden part of the interface, which is the context, the state, and a few other things. But we will talk about that later. The main thing that we have to care about is about the props. So another thing I was talking about, this is great for business code, and in contrast with library code. So what I mean with library code. Library code is what we learn to do at uni or at school or whatever. It's the good code. The, the good code has to be abstract, has to be configurable, has to be portable, has to be agnostic of the use case, has to be have to solve everyone's problem at the same time. So we end up with something like this, and this is great for its own for its purpose, for a library purpose. Right? We had this Mr. Potato rubber duck that you can change the wings, you can change the beaks, you can put a mustache below the beak. Well, either way, that is great. And if you look out there to some libraries, for example, well, this is not a library itself, but the HTML button. The HTML button has more than 100 props exposed. It is impossible to know, or at least to keep in mind at the same time, all the 100 props, because it also has all the areas, all the whatever event handlers. Then you get more opinionated libraries. For example, Material UI. Material UI, in their documentation, they say that they have 17 props, which are a lot. But again, it's a library. It's expected to be used for everyone. And also the reality is that when you try to do the autocomplete on any on VS Code or whatever, you will get more than 100 props because it's exposing all the props from the underlying HTML button. And you get even more opinionated ones like React Bootstrap that only have 8 props documented. Also, that's the same. It exposes all the HTML buttons. So again, you have a lot of props to think about. And again, this is great for libraries because this is not to solve one problem. This is to solve the problem of everyone that is going to use the library. They have to be agnostic. But how many people here, raise your hand, develop library code? This kind of code that is going to be for everyone's problem. Whoa. Okay, 1, 2. So for you, this is not so valuable. But for the rest, you're probably doing business code. Business code has a high-level meaning. It's to solve a business need. It's specific to the use case. It's, you need to solve that. And it's really, really concrete, really specific. And also, it should be only what is used. Because in business, if you build something that is never used, you have wasted money. Because your time is money, and you shouldn't be wasting money. So here is where the minimum viable interface shines. So if you need a rubber duck, you don't need the Mr. Potato thing that I've showed before. That is a rubber duck. That's enough for people to understand. And that solves the use case that we have. And well, that's minimum viable interface, and that's a button with minimum viable interface. If you don't need more, you don't need more. It's just a text, the icon for enable icon and what it does when you click, and whether it's normal or destructive. You don't need more. That's all the buttons you have in your app. Maybe, yeah, you start adding other types of buttons, you start adding sizes, but maybe you don't. Maybe all the buttons are the same size. So just keep it simple. So let's go back to the principles of MBI. One of the sentences I said before while defining MBI is build your components with the least amount of props needed. And the principles you will do for that is Jagni, Booleans are best, libraries are evil, and avoid impossible states. Okay, let's go one by one with this because, yeah, especially libraries are evil is something that sometimes people get a bit, well, we will see. So, Jagni, how many of you go camping or something like that and have this friend that you say, okay, let's go camping one day? So you pack things for one day, and there's this friend that arrives with things for 3 weeks in the forest. It's like, no, just in case, because this can happen and this can happen, and you ain't gonna need it. We try to predict the future. We try to prepare for the worst case scenario, but most of the times, you are not going to need it. You only need to expose the minimum to satisfy the business needs. The moment you start building something that you are not going to need, you are wasting money. So yeah, for example, this is a simple example, a button. You say, okay, I need a press. And yeah, there are many places that I may want to long press a button. There's any place in your app where you long press? No, but I may need it in the future. There's anything in your app that uses the long press? No, don't add it yet. Don't add it yet. You don't know if you will need it, if you will need it in this form. If this is just wasting time. And I will go even further. Are you using the event? Are you using the E argument? No? Remove it also. You can change this later. But right now you are not using it. You are not going to need it. So remove it. Next one is Booleans are best. And this goes back to with as little options as possible. Booleans are the best because there's only 2 options, true or false. It's really easy to understand. It's really easy to reason about. So Booleans are the best. But, well, yeah, and this comes that the less option the pro has, the best. So not everything can be solved with Booleans. Well, everything can be solved with Booleans. Computers are just Booleans all over the way. Either way, sometimes you want something more complex. So the next best things is enums, or I always forget how it's called in the other thing with TypeScript. You know, like you said, the type that is this string or that string. It has a different name. It's not enums, but you know what I mean. So that is the next best thing, because now you have a limited set of options. And maybe there are 3, 4, but still, it's something that you can handle. The next one is numbers and strings. With numbers and strings, the problem is that the magic numbers, magic strings, things that you say, hey, this should be 100. And that's it. And yeah, you can say, oh, no, in order to make this not a magic number, I'm going to put it in a constant somewhere else. But still, when you are using that component, you have to remember that there's a constant somewhere that you have to put there. No, just if you can do it, use an enum. The only reason to put numbers or strings is that you actually need an arbitrary string. For example, a text on a button. A text on a button, you usually need an arbitrary string because also you want to localize, you want to, or an arbitrary number. But if you don't need something completely arbitrary, use enums. The next thing will be objects and functions. One of the problems with objects and functions is that, of course, you have to memorize them, and it's annoying. And the other problem is that you are just moving uh, the MVI principles into the object or into the function. Again, do you need all the arguments that you are passing to the function? Do you need all the elements that are in the object? They may be useful. For example, I did not long ago, I forgot to add the code, but we had some tags, and the tags could have an action, but the action on the tag should be could be different than the action on, sorry, you can have a button, and the action on the button should be different than the action of hitting the tag. So what I did is, okay, I'm going to pass action props, let's say, as an object. So if there's no action props, I remove that icon. I remove that action. And I only use the complete tag. If there's action props, I have all the information I need inside that object. Why that? Because if not, I have to put two props like onClick and onClick action. And what happens if I have an onClick action but I don't have an action? Impossible states, I don't like that. Well, back to the topic, sorry. The next worst thing is React elements. I was talking during lunch with some people, and I said this sentence, I don't like children. The thing is, I don't like children in React for many reasons. In this context, I don't like children because, in general, with business code, you want to have full control over how things look. The moment you have children, the responsibility of how something looks gets into the parent and gets into the developer and opens a door to the developer to introduce there whatever they can imagine. And leaving that door open can break a lot of styling, can break a lot of how things are supposed to look. That's why I don't like to have either children or props that receive directly a React element. And the thing I like the least is class names and styles. The problem with class names and styles is the same. You can mess with how things look. And in theory, you are building all these components, all these design system, if you have one design system, in order not to care about the styles. And suddenly, some developer decides that if they want a green button, they are going to just mess with the style, and they have a green button. And when we want to share, when we want to change the shade of green, we have to look through all over the code. If we don't allow class names and styles, we don't have that problem. But well, so here's an example of how things can be really simple to really annoying. For example, a button, you could say, okay, the button could be either big or not big. And it's really simple. You don't have to care about anything else. Or you can say, okay, I want more options because big or not big is not enough for me. So I pass a enum, well, not an enum, you know, the other thing, and say, okay, it's big, small, or medium, and that's it. Then you could have a size, well, 12. 12 what? 12 pixels, I guess. But is that big? Is that small? Is that medium? What the hell is 12? Next is passing an object. Well, if you are passing a simple object like that, makes no sense. You will pass it as a prop. You are not gaining anything from that. You pass a class name. Okay, do you remember what was the class name for big buttons? Do you remember what was the class name for small buttons? You have to remember that. You have to look through the code some other place where that class name was used. Or you can pass a style, and then you have, again, the problem with the 12. You have a problem with memoization. You have a problem. You have a lot of problems. You pass directly the style. So yeah, that's why Booleans are best. And let's go with libraries are evil. The problem with libraries is that they expose a huge interface because libraries are intended to be big, are intended to be to have a big interface, and they are completely out of your control. Because tomorrow, they decide that they are not going to maintain that library anymore. or there's a critical security issue in the library, or the library doesn't completely satisfy you anymore and you want to change to something more modern. So the moment you have a project that is going to live long, this is going to happen. And libraries are going to be there for you to buy your back. So back to the definition of MBI, we will say that we need the minimum needed to satisfy the business needs. So yeah, libraries are evil. We shouldn't use them, but the reality is that it's a necessary evil. I don't want any of you to be reinventing the wheel. There's smart people doing all these libraries that probably is smarter than me. Well, yeah, I'm going to say smarter than me. And they have thought about more stuff that you probably are not going to think about, like accessibility or edge cases. So libraries is something that you should use. So they are a necessary evil. So how do we ward from that evil? Well, simple. Wrap and forbid. You will create a wrapper around your library that will reduce the interface as much as possible. Like, hey, I need this huge library just for my buttons. Then I'm going to only expose the button component, nothing more. And the moment I do that and forbid with SLIN's rules to that library to be used anywhere else in the code, the day I want to change that library, it's going to be really simple. I only have to change one file. I mean, actually, I have an example here. We have a footer, 2 buttons, on press you do stuff. And now we want to change the library. And the other library, instead of on press, says that it's on click. So we have to make all these changes on this file. Yeah, probably it's not. I should change the colors, but well, whatever. We're just changing. What is in red is what changes. And this is on the footer component, but anywhere else that we are using the button, we have to make similar changes. What happens if we wrap things? Okay, we have this wrapper that says, okay, the button is just the library button with on press. Now I want to change to another library. I have to change this file. So I have changed this file, and these are the changes I have to make. Perfect. So what changes do I have to do in the other component? Absolutely none. No changes at all. And I can I can keep living really happy, and the commit history is way simpler, and everything is just better if you do this. Okay, the next thing is about avoiding impossible states. One of them is let's say high-level impossibles. Like a button cannot be big and small at the same time. Like we are going really into Booleans are best, so I'm going to build it with is big and is small. Yeah, that's a bad idea because you now have 4 options instead of 3. But yeah, also it's like, yeah, I could understand what happens if both are false. I mean, if it's not big and it's not small, it's medium. But what happens if both are true? That's an impossible state. And exposing that impossible state. What should you do in those cases? The next best thing, so an enum. But also business level impossibles. For example, let's imagine that we have a message and we have a prop to say if it's ephemeral and a prop to say it's urgent. But the way our system works, by design, an ephemeral message cannot be urgent. If it will be urgent, it wouldn't be ephemeral. If that is the case, we have to avoid that also, because if not, we have to attest for that, we have to define the behavior, and we shouldn't be doing that because it's wasting time, wasting money. We change to the next best thing. It's the type, it's either urgent, ephemeral, or none. And that's it. So those are the principles. Those are the things that you have to try to achieve with MBI. But there's one thing that we cannot forget, which is the hidden interface. We are talking all the time about props. And actually, you could create the perfect component. The perfect component is that one. You don't have any props. You just have it and you use it. The problem is when that perfect component inside is like that. Like, yeah, we don't have any props, but we are getting a lot of stuff from the context. We are getting a lot of stuff from the state. We are getting a lot of stuff from the queries. So I'm not telling you not to use context, not to use state. What I'm telling you is that this is also an interface, and you have to keep it in as much as possible in check. So usually for selectors, it's not so often that people go haywire with that because people is really aware that you have to make good selectors. You shouldn't be doing having. If you just need one part of the state, just go for that part of the state, not many things at the same time. But for example, for context or even queries, could be something that people don't put so much thought process on that. So for example, for context, one thing that you could do in this example that you use two different contexts and maybe you are using only a little part of the context is something like that. Let's create my own custom hook for this component or maybe for many components because maybe many components do the same thing and say, hey, give me this part of the context A, this part of the context B, and just give me those values. Why will we do that? Well, first of all, if our context changed and now is we put everything in one single place or we separate it into even more context things, is you only have to change this function, not all over the place. Also, here the name is use custom context, but the name could be get me the post with this ID. And get me the post with the ID may come from the context, may come from the server, may come from the state. And if you ever want to change that, you only have to change it here, not change all the logic somewhere else. So this kind of wrapping also helps with that. And now to the favorite part of everyone, what the problems of this. And this has a lot of problems. I'm not going to lie. I mean, this is not a silver bullet. This has a lot of problems. First of all is that when the business needs change, you are screwed because now if the business needs changes, you have to change the interfaces. You have to change. You don't have to change only the implementation of what you are doing. You also have to change the interfaces because now you don't need the post. You need something else or something more. And then you will have a lot of work ahead of yourself. Another problem that comes from that is when the Jagnis becomes something I call the Oyanis, which is, oops, you actually needed it. So yeah, that happens, and it's really frustrating. But we, as humans, usually focus on what goes wrong because that's what we can change. Everything that goes right is working fine, so we don't have to worry about it. So we put a lot of thought on these Oyanis without realizing that the amount of effort that we are putting into fixing an Oyani, it's a small fraction of all the effort we have saved with all the other Jagnis. So yeah, sometimes you get that. It's frustrating, but you have to take it a deep breath and live with the frustration and understand that it was worth it. And then it's really uncomfortable to adapt because it's that you have to, let's say, you want a green button. Now it's not passing a style that says, hey, the button now is green. No, you have to say, okay, I have a green button. I have to add a new type. I have to implement it below. I have to use it in the places that are needed green buttons. It's uncomfortable. And then whenever you make a change in the interface, in whatever interface, that is going to propagate through the code. Like everywhere that component is used, you will have to update in some other file. But yeah, those are many problems. But are they such a big problem? Think about it. First of all, what I was saying, the Yanis and the Yanis, all the time you save not doing things that you don't need. Yeah, it sometimes you get frustrated and actually needed that, but you save a lot of time. They are uncomfortable to adapt, but how many times have beaten you doing the quick thing, the easy thing? Like you do the easy thing, you say, okay, I need this button to be green. I'm going to put it only in the style. Then I want a different shade of green. And suddenly there's 30 different places in the code that you have to change just to get a different shade of green. Uh, that being uncomfortable forces you to think about how you want to engineer the thing, how you want to design uh, your project. And yeah, changes in the interface propagates to all the code. But if you don't follow this, changes in the implementation propagates all over the code. And that is also not a great idea. So I think that, of course, this is not to use, as I said at the beginning, as a dogma. It's something that you should be considering case by case. And sometimes you decide that, yeah, we are going to take this risk and we are going to do something different. But I think it's an interesting way to approach many of the problems. And yeah, that's it. You have the slides and my LinkedIn if you want to add me or whatever. Thank you very much.